Welcome to Getting to Know the 5 Critical Components of the NC K-3 Formative Assessment Process. The NC K-3 Formative Assessment Process is comprised of 5 critical components. All 5 must be present to implement the process. Selecting learning targets are the skill steps along the construct progression that are used to select learning targets with students. Developing criteria for success are performance descriptors matched to skill steps within the construct progressions that are used to develop criteria for success for learning targets and shared with students. Eliciting evidence of learning are when you use multiple assessment means to elicit evidence to provide insight into students' learning of skills along the construct progression. Interpreting the evidence, which is what this module is about today, involves using construct progressions as tools to interpret the evidence elicited by locating students' learning status along the progressions. Adapting and responding to learning needs involves using descriptive feedback, which is provided by teachers and used by students based upon the learning status identified, and ongoing in-the-moment adjustments are made to instruction based upon evidence elicited. This is Module 2 of 5. Focus on interpreting the evidence. This module focuses on one of the 5 critical components with the understanding that all 5 are necessary to implement the process. Interpreting the evidence involves using construct progressions as tools to interpret the evidence elicited by locating students' learning status along the progressions. Some materials are needed for this module. You can download the self-reflection tool by going to this tiny URL on the screen. It can also be found on the Live Binder for Educators by going to this link and then clicking on the Formative Assessment Process tab and then clicking on the Self-Reflection tab. You may also want to download the at-a-glance documents. They can be found on the Live Binder for Educators as well by going to this link for the Live Binder and then clicking on the Construct Progressions tab, and then click the At-a-Glance Resources tab. And then you can choose which resource best meets your needs or download them all. An optional material that you might want to also download is the North Carolina Construct Progressions and Situations booklet. We'll be talking more about that at the end of the module. It can also be found on the Live Binder for Educators. And you can find it when you click on the Construct Progressions tab. We have a single goal for this module, which we'll talk about in 2 parts. Participants will gain an understanding of how to interpret evidences of learning from the use of multiple assessment means and locate students' current learning status along the construct progressions. Let's revisit some of our learning from the first module, eliciting evidence of learning. Because part of our goal involves using multiple assessment means, which we learned in the first module. We want to use multiple assessment means when we interpret evidences of learning from the use of multiple assessment means. So how do I go about doing this? First, we have to gather evidences of learning from the use of multiple assessment means as we learned in Module 1. So we want to look for multiple opportunities during instruction, daily and ongoing, to elicit evidence of learning. We also want to look for a balance of time during the school day that will allow for teacher-initiated and child-initiated opportunities to elicit this evidence. During the first module, we talked about a couple of examples from the KEA pilot. Here's an example of a teacher-initiated opportunity to elicit evidence of learning. 2 of our pilot teachers, Angela Coram and Mallory Moore from Stokes County, did a series of lessons using the book David Goes to School by David Shannon. And they noticed that they were able to observe several of the skills along the construct progressions By doing this series of lessons, they simply ask themselves, what are we teaching this week? And how does that match to the construct progressions? And that allowed them to elicit this evidence of learning using teacher-initiated opportunities. They were able to elicit fine motor skills, following directions, emotional literacy, object counting, and letter knowledge. Another example that we shared during the first module from a KEA pilot teacher that was child-initiated was Kimberly Harshall's example from Orange County. In Kimberly's classroom during center time, students are engaged with lots of activities, with books, letter activities, and counting objects. As you can see, this child created a Play-Doh pancake and cut it into pieces and was able to count each piece. It was a planned and purposeful time to gather child-initiated evidences of learning across multiple constructs for students. So using our module goal, we want to interpret evidence by locating students' current learning status along the construct progressions. So how do I do this? The tools for interpreting multiple assessment means are the construct progressions. Locate the skills you observe students demonstrate along the construct progressions. If you are uncertain about where to locate students' current learning status, use the performance descriptors for the skill steps as a guide. Performance descriptors paint a picture of each skill, providing classroom examples of what you might observe. Locating students' current learning status using the technology platform. Choose what works best for you. The platform contains the construct progressions, which can be viewed when you have documented evidences. Then you can record students' learning statuses that match the evidence recorded. Teachers have also used flipbooks and at-a-glance versions of the construct progressions, and then uploaded them to the platform. Here's an example from the pilot. Megan Turner from Alamance Burlington School System created flipbooks with the construct progressions, and she was able to put sticky notes on each progression when she observed a student demonstrating this skill. So, what if I still have questions about how to interpret the evidence I gathered? What if I think I need more evidence to determine a learning status, and I'm just not sure how to elicit additional evidences? Well, then I can try using one of the situations designed to support evidence gathering. Some suggested probes are provided within the sample situations in the construct progressions and situations booklet that I mentioned at the beginning of the module. Here's an example. Some suggested probes for object counting are similar to the ones that I had in the example note that I shared. How many do you have? That's a probe that I asked Cindy. If you counted them again, how many would you have? Are you sure? How do you know? That's another probe that I asked Cindy. And that just helps us to gather some additional evidence. Probes to avoid. If you counted them again, you would have the same amount, right? And these are probes that I'm sure teachers would not want to say to students because this gives them the answer. It gives them the mathematical concept. So it tells you on these situations, and the situations are teacher-initiated, things that you can set up in your classroom, and there are also some observational type situations that you can set up that are more child-initiated. So these probes will help you to know, here's some things that you can say to elicit additional evidence, and here's some things that you wouldn't want to say because it will give the concept to the child. I still have questions about how to interpret the evidence I gathered. So what if I've read the performance descriptors and I'm not sure which skill step to use as the current learning status? Sometimes that can happen. So then try looking for the interpreting the evidence section within the situations. There are a lot of examples there, and that could help you to gain a deeper understanding. So here's an example from page 12 of the Construct and Situations book. And it's, again, from object counting, and it just gives several examples. of observations that you could see when doing this particular situation, and what the best fit would be along the construct progression, what the learning status would be. So an observation, and then this is how you would interpret this particular piece of evidence. And that can be really helpful for you as you're trying to figure out how to interpret pieces of evidence. You can download this booklet, the North Carolina Construct Progressions and Situations, for free, a digital copy, on the live binder, as I showed at the beginning of the module. You can also buy a paper version, if you'd like, from NCDPI Publications by calling this number or emailing Publications with the order number KG121. Let's do a quick review. Module 2, focusing on interpreting the evidence. The module goal: participants will gain an understanding of how to interpret evidences of learning from the use of multiple assessment means and locate students' current learning status along the construct progressions. Let's do a self-check. Use the self-reflection document you downloaded at the beginning of the module. Complete the section for interpreting the evidence by checking one of the following: in place, partially in place, or not in place. With a partner or individually, set a goal for eliciting evidence. Describe how you will reach your goal. For example, use my lesson plans to look for times to observe object counting this week and interpret the evidence by marking the skills I observe students demonstrate along the construct progression.